Well, welcome everybody to tonight's event on election integrity. Will my vote count? I'm John Hinderaker, president of Center of the American Experiment, and we're delighted to have you all with us tonight. We're also live streaming this event, and many hundreds more are watching us live from the comfort of their homes. And we're going to archive it as well so that it will be available for many more people to watch over the weeks to come. So what we're going to have tonight is a panel discussion, and we have four fantastic panelists, and I'm going to introduce them collectively to kick it off, and then we're just going to jump in, and each panelist is going to talk for 8 or 10 minutes, and then we'll have a little time maybe for some conversation among the panel, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers from the audience. So let me start by just introducing you to our panelists. First of all, Mary Kiffmeyer. Mary served as Minnesota's Secretary of State from 1999 to 2007 and is now the President Pro Tem of the Minnesota State Senate, where she chairs the State Government Finance and Policy and Elections Finance Committee. Minnesota's legislature has the most complicated committee names of any body in America. So Mary is one of the foremost experts in Minnesota on voting practices. Andy Cilek. Andy is the president of the Minnesota Voters Alliance, the watchdog organization that focuses on election integrity in Minnesota. MVA has won a number of lawsuits, including a case in the United States Supreme Court relating to election integrity. Eric Eggers, on my left, is a researcher and reporter at the Government Accountability Institute. He is the author of the book Fraud: How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election, which was published in 2018. Eric has recently made 2 videos on voter fraud for Prager University and currently is a regular on cable news. And finally, Matthew Tyrmand is an investor and editorial journalist and a director of Project Veritas. He supervised the undercover investigation that Project Veritas carried out here in Minnesota of voter fraud, as well as in other states. So that's our panel, and we're going to lead it off with Mary Kiffmeyer, who's going to talk about the landscape in Minnesota and what we do well, what we do not so well, and where the pitfalls are in the 2020 election. Mary?
Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate being here, especially right now, but especially for the Center for the American Experiment that just does a great job, our true think tank, and very important to Minnesota. And John, your leadership, certainly we have had wonderful leaders, but appreciate your taking that work. Thank you very much. So for elections in particular, I liked what, there was the topic of your book. It was about a plan to steal elections. And so let me tell you this, one of the things that has frustrated me for so many years, they have plans, we react. They have plans, we react. There is no bill that they put forward legislatively unless it has an advantage for them. And they're very crafty about it, very crafty. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, a piece here and a piece there. It doesn't look like much until some of the pieces start fitting together. But they do plan and they pay attention. However, so many of us on the other side just react. And the system of election system is actually about a 2-year cycle. So we're coming into technically the conclusion of a 2-year cycle. And we're all paying close attention right now, of course, and we should. But too often, it's like new news. And I'm here to say, pay attention always. I've been working since last December with the Minnesota Republican Party, because that's the area that I have responsibility for in particular now, to do an election protection program. So created a website to sign up election judges, attorneys, and poll challengers. Back when the winter weather was there, nobody, at least on our side for the most part, other than folks like me who are into this stuff, we're paying attention. And so we've been able to recruit, but sadly, we need about 16,000, and wonderfully, we had more than ever before, but maybe around 4,000. So when you put the call out ahead of time for election judges and poll challengers, and you work so hard to get people to sign up, and then the time to do that is in that January, February, March, April, then the list goes to the Secretary of State, the list goes out to the counties, cities, and the townships, then it's the list. And waking up on September and saying, I want to get on that list is too late, right? So what's really important is for us, number one, my message, if you can all take to heart more than anything, it is a system, it is a 2-year cycle, and you need to always pay attention and always be involved. If you are not in as an election judge or a poll challenger, it's just a lot harder. Much better if you're already in. So I want to encourage that. But here we are, 2 weeks away from Election Day. And I wanted to also establish that words really mean things. They really matter, and especially in elections. And by the way, I worked as an election judge for 11 years in the polling place. For 11 years before I even thought of running for Secretary of State. I had a little postcard. And by the way, when we had a slow election day, I read through all 12 chapters of the election law. It was a very slow day, twice. The second time, I put sticky notes on the juicy spots. So I guess you might say I was destined, you might say, to enter into that field. I was fascinated by it, but on the preciseness and on the detail. So when you come to Minnesota, you hear about mailing out ballots, a variety of things, mail-in. Minnesota does not have mail-in except for townships where they are able to have a specific section of law which they have hugely exercised this year. And many township residents don't even know that the township board voted to take away their polling place and force them into mail-in ballots. But that's an issue for the township supervisors. They're blaming the counties, they're blaming everybody. No, I will tell you this, the township supervisors voted for it, hold them accountable, and if you don't, they will think they can just take this away from you with impunity. They're accountable to you, especially in township government. You vote on their budget, take advantage of it, and spread the word and use it. So in general, otherwise, Minnesota has absentee ballots. And the difference, of course, one is the ballot is preemptively sent out. With an absentee ballot, the application comes in, and once that goes through its process, then the ballots are sent out. I happen to be fortunate this year. I have a new grandson living with me. He is an unregistered voter. He decided to go ahead and do this absentee ballot because he was going into the military down to Fort Sill. So I got a taste of seeing what materials came with them, the vouching form, all the other forms that came with it. But one thing I think you should know, every absentee ballot application, when it comes in to the county office, this is always done at the county office, and some cities like Minneapolis City, where they apply a number for that absentee ballot application. That then is used on that application to the materials, the outside materials when it's sent out, and when it comes along the way, accepted, rejected, opened, whatever it is, that barcode then tracks it. That's why the Secretary of State can have an absentee ballot tracking system on the website. I have not tried that. I don't know how well it works. It'd be good for all of you, anybody you know, to go and do that. And the other thing that I want to say about this system, there's nothing that frustrates me more than somebody will come up to me 2 months after the election and tell me somebody did something somewhere sometime and they want me to do something about it. Really, people? It doesn't work that way. Just like in any criminal offense, we have this thing called the United States Constitution. So far, we still have it. And remember that due process clause? Give due process. But there's an important part of the due process, and that is collecting evidence. I love watching forensics TV. You know, that one little pink hair, that one little thread, you know, the difference between, and by the way, Trey Gowdy is on quite a bit on those old reruns. He's just great, by the way, just as good as he is now. But when you realize the importance of collecting that evidence, so collect, document, take photos, be part of the process, be involved. I was also asked to say, where are some of the vulnerabilities? Well, just about everywhere, but where are some of them that you should pay particular attention to? And right now, it's the absentee ballot boards. I had a hearing as committee chair, and I had Hennepin County and Ramsey County come in and tell us how they process absentee ballot boards, how they do it. Hennepin County, I had them go first. The privilege of the chair, I get to decide some of those things, and there was a reason for it. Hennepin County before the Secretary of State, because once the Secretary of State spoke, I'm not sure that the counties would contradict after a while. So I wanted to hear directly from the counties, and very nicely, the head of the elections, Hennepin County, was there and walked us carefully through it and talked all through. I specifically asked her about the statute that says you must use election judges for absentee ballot boards. She said, well, we hire people. I said, well, you hire election judges then. And what was interesting, I'll cut it shorter, is that contrary to Minnesota state law, they just skipped over this must use election judges in accordance with state law, meaning from political party lists. And she just jumped right into deputizing people, doing an end run around the whole system. So she went through that, and I challenged her. I said, this law, I quoted the law, and said, it says you must. It's not an if, not a maybe, not if you feel like it. It says you must. She did not really answer that. It's very difficult to answer the clear face of election law. But to let you know, by holding the hearing, I have her on record. And we quoted the law. By the way, the lead Democrat jumped up afterwards and said, oh my, no, you can't do that. You can't ask these questions. You can't do this. You can't do reading of this statute because we have a court case going on right now. And I pushed right back and said, Senator Carlson, reading the chapter of law is never a problem, no matter what court case is going on. And this is a committee with jurisdiction over elections. It is our duty to ask these questions and go through that. So that pretty much took care of that. And then we went on and I had Mr. Triplett from Ramsey County, asked him how they went through it. Lo and behold, they hired 93 election judges from political party lists. And when they went through the current list, they went to the previous list, which they have many more names. They were able to have 93 official election judges of two different major political parties, Democrats and Republicans, to do the job of accepting and rejecting. They use the county staff only to schedule, help with supplies, perfectly appropriate to do that sort of work. Contrast between those two. Which one are you going to trust? Now, personally, my goal is this. When you all know about shoplifting. Well, they maybe catch 1% of the shoplifting. The rest of us pay the loss of the 99%, and they usually don't even catch up any money from the 1%. But we all know it's happening. The worst thing you can do is to think it's not happening. Then things can flourish. That's why the election judges in the polling places, poll watchers, poll challengers, absentee ballot boards, that is not partisanship. That is using the direction of, I'm for this candidate, I'm for that candidate, and together we'll help make sure that on behalf of all the voters, that the process is fair to each party. That is a good thing, if it is used. Now, there are court cases, and certainly there are those here who are really good at doing that, and I commend them for that. That is really, really important. And I hope by having a committee hearing and putting some things on the record, that can be helpful to the process. But John, that's just kind of a basis. I know you have 3 other great experts.
Mary, let me just follow up with a quick question. You correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems to me that when we talk about these ballot boards, one reason they're so critically important is that unlike past election cycles where you had a relatively manageable number of absentee ballots, this year people are being encouraged to vote promiscuously by mail, and these ballot boards are going to wind up judging a huge percentage of all the ballots that come in. Is that right?
That is true. It is an unprecedented time in the volume. But folks, in those other years where there's still the process, you need to exercise your right, because you never know till the day after, and then it's too late. What I want to say is, yes, we're paying more attention now, which is a really good thing. It's unprecedented. But sometimes that eyes on it, some of that, we're at least alert, we're aware, and doing a little bit more about it. Who knows how much happened in those other years, but nobody was looking. You should always be looking.
Let's move on to Andy Cilek, president of the Minnesota Voters Alliance. Andy, what's your perception? You've been in the thick of the fight here. Tell us how it's going.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be up here with phenomenal people here, Senator Mary Kiffmeyer and all the new folks here, and especially Project Veritas and Eric Eggers. John, thanks for putting on this forum. My take on it, and I had all these notes prepared, and I get in a little meeting downstairs, and I asked Mary Kiffmeyer, I said, Mary, did you put together a lot of notes? And she had one of those little stickums that she was talking about earlier. No, I said, I shouldn't have put all these notes together. But I just want to talk generally about, Minnesota overall has probably one of the best election laws in the United States in the Constitution. It spells out who's eligible to vote. You have to be a citizen. You have to be 18 years old. You have to be a citizen for 90 days, and you have to live in the precinct for 30 days. But you can't be a convicted felon, convicted of treason, unless restored to civil rights, or you can't be under guardianship where a court has removed your voting rights. So the law is crystal clear who's eligible and who's not eligible. And the Democrats here in Minnesota, every single bill that they push forward, and which is hundreds, isn't it, every year, they're only looking at getting more Democrats elected. And every year that goes by, the constitutional provision that restricts certain people from voting gets further and further in the distance. And just to put in perspective, as the title of this event is called, Will My Vote Count? And I'm sure some of you may ask yourself that question. I know I have. But just to bring you back to 2008, if I could for a second. In 2008, you all remember the Al Franken, Norm Coleman. There was about 500,000 same-day registrants that registered and voted in that election. After the election, one of the biggest problems in Minnesota is same-day registration, which was adopted in 1974. And the problem with same-day registration is people vote and their eligibility isn't checked till after the election's over and the vote is counted. So for Al Franken, Norm Coleman, 48,000 of those people who registered on election day that were subsequently checked right after the election, after the results were certified, 48,000 failed one or more of the eligibility checks. 48,000. And that number, I don't believe, came up in the Coleman lawsuit in the Supreme Court at all. 48,000 people failed an eligibility check, and that race was won by 312 votes by Al Franken. Fast forward to 2016, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, you all remember that race? The Office of the Legislative Auditor did a study on the voter registration system, and they spent about, 8 or 9 months, Mary? I think you assigned it to them, to the legislative auditor.
The legislature as a whole voted to do that.
But you chaired that.
Yes, I helped make sure it happened, yes.
And so the Office of the Legislative Auditor, which is a nonpartisan agency, they examined the voter registration system, and they actually asked us for some input, which we provided on some ideas on how to get started, because it's a big task to have to study the voter registration system in Minnesota. So they came out, 9 months later, they came out with a report. And one of the things that they looked at, which caught my attention, it was about 104 pages, it's on their website currently, is how many people, as I mentioned earlier in the 2008 with Al Franken and Norm Coleman, you had 48,000 people who were challenged, right? They failed one of the tests, and those were same-day registrants. But now if we look at how many of those people who are challenged go to vote in the next election, what happens with those people? So in the 2016 election, the legislative auditor said 26,000 people who were already registered before November, and they had a challenge status, meaning they were challenged felony, challenged citizenship, challenged postal return, or a whole variety of reasons why they failed one of the tests. 26,000 of them were challenged that voted in November of 2016. The auditor decided they were going to look at a sample of those. Now, how many of them were really eligible or ineligible? So they looked at 612 of them, a small sample of 612 that were challenged felony. And they looked through the court records and they did extensive research on those 612. And the auditor concluded that 20 of them might have been eligible to vote. 20 of them may have been eligible. And that's in the legislative auditor's report. Now, if you take a look at the election coming up, there's about 36,000 challenged persons in the statewide voter registration system today. We asked the Secretary of State a couple months ago how many are in the system. That's how we know that number. It's about 36,000 that are currently registered that are challenged for one reason or another. And that's the same thing's going to happen. They're going to vote, and we're not going to know if they're eligible or not until after the election. Plus, you're going to have all the same-day registrants that are coming in to vote, which that number's dropped a little bit because absentee voting is through the roof. But did anybody hear on Channel 9 yesterday? They already have over 1 million ballots requested as of yesterday. Over 1 million absentee ballot applications or ballots have already been sent out to applicants already. 1 million. That already exceeds the highest number of absentee ballots that we've ever had in Minnesota, which I think was about 680,000 in 2016. So as Senator Kiffmeyer was saying, absentee ballot issues and absentee ballot boards is where we primarily focused all of our energy in the last 9-10 months. We've filed 5 lawsuits against various jurisdictions: the city of Minneapolis, Ramsey County, Olmsted County, which is Rochester, city of Duluth. We just added Lake County, 2 harbors to that list. And what's amazing is after we filed all these lawsuits, and they're all still in litigation, literally the next day after we filed a lawsuit, these election officials are reaching out to Republicans on the Republican Party list for the first time ever. It's phenomenal. So now there's a lot of work to do because, as Senator Kiffmeyer said, I watched that hearing, Mary, phenomenal job, by the way. And what you had there was Hennepin County, Jenny Gilms, the elections manager. And if any of you want to watch it, isn't it on the Senate website? It's just phenomenal. Because Senator Kiffmeyer is asking Jenny Gilms, the director of Hennepin County, when Mary Kiffmeyer was one of the authors of the absentee ballot board bill, and Jenny Gilms was fighting her, saying, well, we don't really care what you think it says. We follow Secretary of State Steve Simon. Oh, that's the game we're playing. Well, how did this get so screwed up in the beginning? And I think, and I'll try to kind of end up with this, how did all these ballot boards get taken over by the Democrats, including early voting centers? Because the principles that we're talking about on how Steve Simon concocted this scheme on how to keep Republican election judges out and off of these absentee ballot boards. And they've done the same thing with the early voting centers. One of our friends, Don Bumgardner, who many of you know, works in the Roseville Library at the early voting center. And Don says, Andy, I think I'm the only Republican here. I says, how many people are in there, Don? 20. So he got me a list of the names, and we actually had our researcher look up every one of the names. Every person in there is a Democrat, along with Don Bumgardner. So the work that we have to do with this whole business of how they took over our absentee ballot boards, and here's how Steve Simon did it. The statute says that there must be a sufficient number of election judges. The next sentence says the ballot board may include deputy city clerks or deputy county auditors. Now, a normal thinking, reasonable person would think, well, yeah, the ballot board's got to have a whole bunch of election judges from different parties, and if there's a deputy city clerk or a deputy county auditor, they can participate. But the Democrats looked at it and say, how can we exploit this? And what they do is they make everybody deputies. Minneapolis just appointed 102 deputy city clerks 2 weeks ago. And they're all temporary seasonal people. It reminds me of that Saturday night. How many of you guys remember Saturday Night Live when they had Father Sarducci? And he made everybody the Pope? Anybody who wanted to join the church could be the Pope? That's how ridiculous this is. So everybody's a deputy in Minneapolis. And what they told the court is, we can't trust Republican election judges because they're partisan. What about the 102 deputies? They're nonpartisan. Folks, this has been the biggest swindle I've ever seen in my entire life. And on that hearing that Mary Kiffmeyer chaired, the Senate hearing, if you guys go listen to it, one of the best questions on there, other than Mary's, of course, was Senator Mark Curran, who's your vice chair. Senator Mark Curran says, Ms. Gelms, how do you train somebody to be nonpartisan? And she didn't really have an answer. Well, all of us, we're all nonpartisan. We work for the government. We work for the city. We're all nonpartisan. I get it. But what the legislature understood is they wanted party balance of people that had outsiders who had a vested interest in that election. Once somebody's a staff or an employee, they no longer have that independent attitude, and that's what the legislature understood. And when the legislature passed that bill, and I'll end with this, that absentee ballot boards in 2010, at first the Democrats tried to get staff to do all the accepting and rejecting, and no Republicans signed on, and Governor Paulini vetoed that bill. So the next year they came together and they said, this isn't going to work. We have to work together. The Democrats started working with Republicans, and 194-2 that bill passed, and I believe Senator Kiffmeyer was one of the authors. She doesn't remember. She's authored so many bills she doesn't remember. But everybody was on that bill, the Democrats and Republicans, and we watched all the videos and audios, and all they said was, we want Republicans and Democrats accepting and rejecting every ballot. And the last thing I'll say is, as I think Mary alluded to, I've seen more momentum in the last 4, 5, 6 months in the whole party getting involved as poll challengers, absentee ballot board judges, starting asking questions to their city council, city clerks, showing up at the board meetings. And that's what it's going to take. It's going to take everybody getting involved and feeling like they have a right to be in those rooms, and they do. Thanks.
Andy mentioned Secretary of State Steve Simon, and I should just say that I did invite the Secretary of State to participate in this panel tonight. I would have loved to have him here. I really would have. I got a polite response from his scheduler saying that as a result of COVID, he has not made any public appearances since March, and therefore was not able to be with us. But I sincerely appreciated that they gave us a cordial response, and I only wish that the Secretary of State could have been here. Let's move on now to Eric Eggers, author of the book Fraud. Eric?
Hey, thank you. It's very nice to be here. I actually live in Florida. Thank you. So when I got the call with the opportunity to speak here this evening, my first question was naturally, what's the weather like? And I was told, well, we have 4 seasons, which I believe is Minnesota nice for it's snowing. So I guess I'll just, in honor of Minnesota nice, I'll just say what I think we've heard thus far is that American elections have opportunities for improvement in terms of security. Sadly, and these are one of the things I discussed in my book, this is not new, and I so appreciate hearing from Andy and Mary and all the work that you all are doing and the investment of people that are here this evening, because clearly you're invested. But the big picture nationally, unfortunately, mirrors many of the issues that we're seeing in Minnesota. The Supreme Court cited statistics from a Pew Center in a ruling about whether or not it was okay for states like Ohio to take efforts to improve their voter registration lists. And they found that 1 in 8 voter registrations, that's 24 million voter registrations in this country, were totally wrong or partially inaccurate, right? So why we have these issues where what COVID has done, what this effort to increase mail-in balloting or absentee balloting in mass has done is it's put pressure on the very real vulnerabilities that were already in existence. So why do those vulnerabilities matter? Why does it matter if we have voter registration rolls that are totally wrong? Because what's now happening is people will get ballots that shouldn't. Either people that aren't really citizens, aren't really residents. So we've got this mass, wave of extra ballots that are out there. So then the question becomes, well, how easy is it to take advantage of voter registrations that aren't accurate? And that's a question that independent investigators in the city of New York set out to uncover a few years ago. They did this investigation. They identified 63 voter registrations that were wrong because either the people were dead, they'd left the state, or they were in prison. And so they sent these undercover investigators to different precincts around New York City to try to cast ballots on behalf of these 63 ineligible voters. Of the 63 efforts to cast ballots, 61 were successful. And one of the only 2 attempts that weren't successful was because the person was attempting to cast a ballot on behalf of a felon, and the felon's mother was actually working at the polling place that day. So you can imagine it maybe was not her best day on the job. But that's how we know how easy it is to exploit these vulnerabilities in the system. So then the question is, okay, well, it's so easy to exploit them. Well, why don't we do anything to fix it, right? And in fact, states like Ohio, Indiana, Georgia, states have done things to say, okay, we're going to make sure you respond to a postcard. We're going to go do an analysis of our voter registration efforts. And we're going to make sure that only people that are actually registered to vote should be registered to vote. Well, then they have this little issue. They get filed these lawsuits by people like Mark Elias and these left-funded organizations. And I hate to use the George Soros name, but unfortunately, he is a common source of funding for these efforts. And so one of the things that I found was really fascinating, this is why we titled the book, The Plot to Steal, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election, is because the same people that fund lawyers to stop states from cleaning up their voter rolls, from making sure that you have to show an ID to be able to cast a ballot, those are the same people that fund groups like Acorn and La Raza, who then go out and gather up as many voters as possible and funnel them through those vulnerabilities that the lawyers fight to make sure still exist. And unfortunately, it happens all over the country, every place. And then you say, all right, well, you know, what's the game plan? What is the plan? And I think it's twofold. Number one, the current head of the Democratic National Committee is a guy named Tom Perez. And before Tom Perez worked for the Obama administration in the Civil Rights Division for the Attorney General's office, he worked for an organization called Casa de Maryland. Now, Casa de Maryland was an Acorn-like organization, but their number one job was to expand the ability for non-citizen voting in the state of Maryland. Now, people may not realize this, but it's actually legal for non-citizens to vote in some local elections throughout the country. And in fact, in Tom Perez's hometown of Tacoma Park, Maryland, non-citizens have been legally voting since 1992. So what that does is it increases the awareness of voting and it destigmatizes it for non-citizens so that non-citizens, A, know that they can participate in elections and certain things. And then now when it's these vulnerabilities, now they can become registered to vote in federal elections. And oh, by the way, now you're gonna be mailed a ballot. And oh, by the way, now you're gonna be the subject of political outreach through ballot harvesting or other just political operations. So you can see that you might see a dramatic increase in what's already not an insignificant level of non-citizen voting in this country. And then the second piece is, I think, you know, we know what the plan for the future is by what the proposal for the present was in the first piece of legislation that Nancy Pelosi and the House of Representatives submitted after the COVID pandemic, right? You've got an economy shutting down, you've got everyone worried about what should this country look like, let alone our elections. And included in their first stimulus package was a proposal that would have done three things for American elections. It would have eliminated voter ID, it would have mailed everyone in this country a ballot, and it would have nationalized ballot harvesting, or the practice of the third-party solicitation, collection, and delivery of ballots. So we've seen what's happened in California as they became the first state to legalize that practice. And what I think is really interesting is whatever you think about the practice of ballot harvesting, like I'm all for people not having to jeopardize their physical health to participate in American democracy. I do think we should do what we can to protect America's electoral and democratic health, right, in the process. But you see now what the California Republican Party has done is they set out these collection boxes for ballots. And so they said, okay, it says the official name, we'll receive, you can drop off your ballot here. And the California Democratic Party said, well, wait a minute, what are you doing? That's against the rules. So I just think it's really telling that the California Democratic Party is concerned about what happens to ballots that go into these drop boxes, but they're not concerned about the idea of people going door to door and collecting ballots and delivering them. So sadly, I mean, I'm so thankful for the work of Andy and the work of people like Ms. Kiffmeyer, who are making sure that the laws are on the books and the laws are enforced. But just know that what's going to happen on election night and in the effort leading up to election are two things. Number one, they're going to fight to make sure that the laws can change in the name of access, right? So you'll see, that's why we're already seeing states expanding the deadline for when you can accept a ballot. So the threshold for now election security is no longer, it's not just, hey, you used to have to cast a ballot in the polling place. It's not even any longer just, hey, you can submit it in a post office. Now it's, can you have access to a postage mark some days after the election? So I think we're very concerned about that. And yeah, and I think, you know, we're going to see lots and lots of lawsuits and lots of contesting. And I think, unfortunately, we may not know the results of an election sometime after election night. And I think that just augurs very bad things for American democracy.
Eric, before we move on, I just want to mention one of my favorite facts in your book, which is, I think it was in 2016, about 46,000 people voted in that election who were 115 years old or older, according to their registered date of birth, at a time when the oldest person in America was 113 years old. And so all the old jokes about cemeteries being voting precincts of certain political elements is not just a joke. It's an amazing statistic.
Yeah, it's not a joke. You know, people would say that that is a factor of two things. Number one, fraudulent votes being cast. Number two would be just flaws in the voter registration data. And they would say that some states like Ohio have a default on what your birth year is, and they don't have an actual birth year in there. So, right, but the point stands is that we don't have good data on who's voting and who should be voting. But there's a very serious issue that's connected to that, and I'll mention this briefly, is the idea of, you know, who can go out, and now people are empowered to go out and collect ballots, target people for collecting their absentee ballots. In Florida and elsewhere, we actually have, there's a population of senior citizens that's known to be vulnerable and targeted by political operatives, and it's called granny farming. And the name is somewhat colorful, but the reality and the ramifications of the practice are unfortunately very real. And so I think that's another sort of just sad reality with this new massive increase in terms of the number of ballots that are going to be out there, is we're going to see more people being targeted, unfortunately, for their ballot.
So ballot harvesting is something that's, to me anyway, new in these last few years. And Matthew Tyrmand and his group at Project Veritas, and Matthew actually ran that operation that you've all seen the videos, you all know what I'm talking about. But those videos shed light on some really corrupt ballot harvesting going on right here in Minnesota. So Matthew, take it away.
Thank you. First, I'd like to clarify, the real heroes who ran that operation were the undercover journalists, and we have the greatest cohort of undercover journalists probably in American history. True patriots, true idealists, true constitutionalists, and people who are willing to go in and deeply embed themselves in high-risk situations to find out the truth, to uncover it and expose and make transparent and shine the light, and do it with no credit, because they care so much about the mission that they just want to then get deployed to the next mission. And there was no more dangerous an operation that, you know, I've been with James. James has been a close friend from before when I joined the conservative movement. And I joined him as a board member in 2013 or so, as we started really building up the operation and expanding our capacity to do many undercover operations. And in fact, the operation that made James famous, and it was mentioned, was Acorn, because one of their big activities in the inner cities was voter fraud, was election fraud, was fraudulent registration, and James realized that one of the important verticals for Project Veritas was always going to be voter fraud and election fraud. And we ran many operations over the years in New Hampshire, the most famous operation up till now. And I told James when we started seeing the footage that I think this was the highest impact operation we ever did. And the proof was in the pudding, because the level of media vitriol and lying and what Orwell would refer to as tampering with reality that occurred post facto was shameless even by their degraded standards. And I'll talk about some of those examples, especially on the local level, in a few minutes. But this operation was dangerous because of the community that our operatives went into. I mean, this is, and everybody here knows this, if you're attending Center for the American Experiment events and listening to the great John Hinderaker, who I'll just add tangentially, inspired me when I was still on Wall Street in 2008 with his coverage, him and Scott Johnson, how they covered that Frank and Coleman steal. That actually got me rather interested in Minnesota politics and in voter fraud and election fraud. And I thank him and Scott for the work they did, because they made that nationally known. If it wasn't for those two, you guys would know about it, but nobody in America would know about that textbook example of voter fraud and election fraud and that stolen election. And on a side, people in America don't know about Walter Mondale in 1984, the only state that Ronald Reagan lost. That was also a great example of Minnesota voter fraud. And I think that story needs to be out there a lot more, especially leading into this coming election. But we went into the Somali community, and as you know, Minnesota, the Twin Cities, has a huge Somali community. And these are people who are coming in as refugees and who the feds have pretty much dumped into a few centralized locations. This Twin Cities has been the first one. Lewiston, Maine is catching up, and there are others around the country that under Obama especially, they sort of centralized put. And my own theory is that they did that with an eye toward places that might have started to drift toward purple from blue to make sure that that does not happen. So going into the Somali community, we knew it would be dangerous. And we knew we'd find something, because, where there's smoke, there's fire. And everybody has known that there's voter fraud everywhere. And when the left denies it and then they attack you for being a racist or a bigot, or you hate poor people, or you hate, any marginalized group, whether it's identity politics or whatever else they do, it is a way of trying to, a Linskyite tactic to attack you and divert attention. And we know it is ubiquitous, and we've shown it. James has shown it on the micro level with just asking for ballots, like when he asked for Eric Holder's ballot because there's no voter ID, and he was given Eric Holder's ballot. Of course, he denied it because that would be an illegal infraction. In New Hampshire, the investigations led to rules and laws being changed. New Hampshire now has voter ID. So the level of fraud that is so ubiquitous, and we can demonstrate through undercover operations, this is how we're going to fight back and how we're going to win. And Minnesota and what we did in Ilhan Omar's district with her family, her staff, this was Ali Essi is her deputy chief of staff for her district office. That's a high-powered position. And he was obviously running this. We had, multiple sources on record and off record. Off record as in they did not know that they were being filmed, but they were talking about it openly. And we had a worker, a staffer on the campaign, Liban Mohammed, who was bragging about it on his Snapchat. And that's the power of video. We didn't even have to film that. He was admitting it. We had the timestamp, which was July 2nd. And this is incontrovertible proof that it's happening. And what he had was a ton of ballots in hand, in pocket, doing videos of himself in his car, ballots strewn about the dashboard, ballots strewn about the passenger seat. And at that point already, the ballot harvest laws were very clear. There was a sunset on the 3. But even if that was in the time frame that you could have ballot harvested up to 3 ballots, he was walking around an apartment building bragging about how he's still hustling at 6 a.m., at 2 a.m. with handfuls, empirical evidence that it's more than 3, and each one more than 3 is a statutory offense. So, I mean, he should be absolutely investigated and incarcerated because the proof is incontrovertible. And of course, what is Keith Ellison's office doing? He's sending John emails and messages when he sees that there's going to be an event here. Are you sure you're not going to violate public health code because of COVID? As John published on Powerline. So the level of lying when we put this forward, and by the way, there were death threats to the people who were on the tape. We had to remove out of the neighborhood some of these people who were on tape, some who were knowingly on tape, some who weren't, and we got them security and we brought them out of the neighborhood because we have a responsibility to do that. But the level of fraud was so obvious, so incontrovertible, the entire media apparatus went to work to discredit us, to say things like that the guy we caught with his hand in the proverbial cookie jar, red-handed, he said that it was a bribery scheme coming from our whistleblower and reformer. We had what's Tom Lydon in Fox 9 do a hard-hitting piece that was Goebbels would have blushed, the propaganda of it, and not even mentioning the statutes. And that was the one consistent thing in all the coverage. The New York Times, USA Today, Minneapolis Star Tribune, Tom Lydon, they did not mention the actual statute that was being violated. And that's, the journalism 101 historically was who, what, when, where, and why. And, that falls in multiple buckets. And it became a serious tamper with reality. The good news, I'll tell you all, is we're suing all of them. We're going to sue. We've never lost a lawsuit because we have truth on our side. The New York Times said that this was an active disinformation campaign coordinated with the Trump campaign to undercut their hard-hitting expose on Trump's tax returns, which was just as hard-hitting as the nonsense Rachel Maddow ran out in 2016 and had no impact. Anybody who knows anything about taxes knows that this was not a story at all. And they said publicly that they stand by their journalism. Of course, their lawyers are backtracking, and we'll get a retraction because they don't want to lose this case publicly. We've never lost a case for a reason because we work with incontrovertible proof, video. And that kind of brings me to the solution to this problem, which is, and we're talking about poll workers, every one of you has the capacity to be a citizen journalist, because right now we have the same technology at our fingertips that the media elite had solely, and they owned this technology pre-1999, 2000, 2001, with the advent of smarter smartphones. We all can be citizen journalists, and one of the things that we're seeing in Project Veritas is that, and I'll say our tip line is Veritas Tips at Proton Mail. Anything you see, any video you capture in a post office, in a polling site, outside a polling site, in an apartment building, a mailman taking a stack of ballots, film it. Take a picture of it, send it to us. If you do not want the risk of making it public, we will. We all have the capacity to be a solution to this ubiquitous problem. And we know the problem is ubiquitous because of what we just proved and how they lied so vociferously. I mean, you guys saw the coverage in the Star Tribune. Facebook is working with USA Today to do fact checking. And of course, they've got, backdoor partnerships with organizations like Open Society. So it's the same training. We saw the same type of activists in Louisville, Kentucky, who just happened to, rent a mob and go in there. It's the same kind of people who are Alinskyites to their core. The ends justify the means, truth be damned. They are in pursuit of social justice utopia, and our constitutional rights will suffer for it. So we have to be vigilant. So the people who are doing these kind of activities, they're vulnerable, and that's why the media is working double overtime to lie about us, to lie about the proofs that we are demonstrating. I also urge all of you to take a look at the Project Veritas body of work. We've done a lot on voter fraud. In 2016, we had Illinois operatives going to Wisconsin, and we had a guy, Scott Fovel, bragging on hidden camera. We've been busting him in before you're born. We'll be busting him in long after we're gone. I mean, he was truly channeling the spirit of Joe Kennedy. And this is the way these people think, because the ends justify the means. But we now can break through. Nobody trusts the media. Nobody trusts the USA Today fact checker when they get a post facto notification on their Facebook because they shared our video. Don't believe your lying eyes. We fact checked it. It's all nonsense. Well, we do believe our lying eyes. Just a quick side anecdote. My father was an anti-communist dissident in Poland, and he wrote about how every year the Soviets coming from Moscow all through the Iron Curtain would talk about the banner crop yield. But why are we all hungry? Do we trust what we read in Pravda, or do we trust our rumbling bellies? And we as human beings know that. We know when we're being lied to. It's why the mainstream media has, according to a recent years Pew study, an 11% trust ratio, the lowest of any major institution in society. So we are actually going to win the battle or win the war. It's going to be ebbs and flows. What James and our team exposed is a great start. Ilhan Omar is certainly dinged up on a national level because of this. And we proved that voter fraud that they deny is real. So use your phones and take pictures. In Minnesota, in a lot of these states, it's going to be in the post offices, it's going to be in apartment buildings, it's going to be at the polling center, it's going to be in the places where there are these drop boxes. The mailmen, there's a lot of them that are complicit. Talk to your mailmen, by the way. One of the tactics that we use is just talking to people. You can't imagine what you'll find out when you just ask a question with a friendly tone from somebody who may be ideologically an adversary or opposed to your viewpoint. But talk to them. You'll start finding out things. We all have the capacity to be citizen journalists, and that's the potency, because now we have the tools to really deliver scale distribution. So keep that all in mind.
Thank you very much to all of our panel members. We have a few minutes for questions, and I think we have microphones. There's a microphone over there, or over. There's a microphone on the ground floor, a microphone on the second floor. Questions?
Right here. Right here.
Take the mask off and yell, maybe.
So the one thing I'll say, and this is, I defer to the natives of Minnesota to address this, but it wasn't the New York Post story, but there was another story that all kind of came out. And I think to Matthew's point, what's great is that because I think the issue of voter fraud has been elevated by President Trump. We had a commission on it. I think people are more aware of it now and are willing to sort of report it. So I don't know that voter fraud's happening more prevalently now than it has been before, but I think people are just letting us know about it. So in Paterson, New Jersey, right, it's the third largest city in New Jersey, they had 4 people arrested and charged with voter fraud, including 2 elected officials. And what they were doing in New Jersey is they weren't just taking ballots out of mailboxes, but they were building a signature of databases based upon those ballots that they were taking out of the mailboxes, right? So I think that's like the particularly terrifying thing. So it just speaks to, I use this, example all the time. I would never give my wallet to somebody and say, hey, take this to the bank for me.
Yeah. Right.
But for some reason, we're asked to give people our investment in American democracy and just trust that the multiple steps along the way, there won't be any issues. So the Paterson, New Jersey example, and along with the example we heard that you're referencing from the New York Post, speaks to not just your ballot, but future ballots, like signatures, and there's databases. So it just speaks to, there is an organized effort to do this, right? And so I think we're finding more about it. The sad thing that I take from what Andy noted is that we don't typically find, we know what happens, but when do we find out about it? After it's too late, right? We find out about the thousands and tens of thousands of illegal registrations or flawed registrations after the election's over, and everybody just kind of shrugs their shoulders and say, oh, well, but don't worry about voter fraud, it's not real. We only find out about it after the fact, and that's, truly disappointing.
More questions?
Hi.
Hi, I have a couple questions.
Okay.
What, who? Me? Okay. My first question is, so all those ballots that we found out that were harvested for Ilhan Omar, what has happened to them? I'm hoping that they have been dealt with appropriately.
My guess is absolutely not, because this is the office. I mean, if you look at the series of videos we did, our journalists went to the Hennepin County voter office and said, because you have a vouching system here that's absolutely fraudulent, that anybody could come in and then somebody vouches for them. Oh no, they're a Minnesotan, or they moved in and they may not have their license yet, but they're living here with us. And the Hennepin County, I mean, they look like University of Wisconsin-Madison students. They were like, nah, they just tried to blow them off. They weren't interested in it. And this is, the Attorney General. General's job. This is the Secretary of State's job. And in Minnesota, I can't imagine your Attorney General's too interested in prosecuting. They'd rather go after us for having a forum where we discuss it.
Well, that's not encouraging. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm living in a foreign country or a socialist country already. But anyway, my second question is, because we know that there's problems with these ballots, can we start changing the timeline so some of these ballots after the fact are looked at? And so in the case of Norm Coleman, if they had been dealt with and there was a certain time limit that they can be checked into, it would have changed the election decision.
I can take that one. So in regards to your question, to explain again, in a recount, so once the polls close on election day, this year is such a different year. The courts are governing instead of election law. It's really, really sad. And they're using COVID as a cover to justify all kinds of things. So right now in Minnesota, they're supposed to be postmarked at least by election day, but they can come in up to 7 days later. I even question that sometimes. They'll probably go to court again, who knows what. But the main thing is that in a recount, the law is the ballots in the box, you recount what's in. A contest is when you challenge how they got there. But once they're in the box, they're in. There is no pulling back, except in one case, and that is in a precinct at the end of elections, and you reconcile the number of signatures on the roster and the count of the ballots in the ballot box. And if there are more ballots than signatures, you're supposed to withdraw at random enough ballots till you match. Now, that's current Minnesota law, but that's on election day only in regards to ballots cast on election day. That's the only time I know of where you can actually randomly, again, pull them out. But statistically, generally, you know, the odds are going to favor the one who has the most ballots in the box, not the one who has the least. At any rate, it is current Minnesota election law. But you've got to really make the distinction between a recount, which is recounting that which is in the ballot box, and the real issue is how they get there. That is what ballot boards are about, accepting and rejecting that. And by the way, right now it's about 40% of absentee ballots that have been returned. They're expecting about 50%, but remember that still leaves 50% for election day, or 40%. So don't just get all caught up in just absentee ballot boards that election day. And by the way, who of you here today are currently an election judge? Would you stand up if you're currently an election judge? Thank you. And the rest of you who are not candidates, you got your mission cut out for you. Tomorrow morning, you call your city, call your county, tell them which political party you are, and say, I want you to take my name. And by the way, it's very important when you call a government office, find out their name and their title. Be sure you start right there. My husband and I have worked with people who have been in trouble with the IRS. First thing we tell them, you must document. Who do you talk to? What is their title? And by the way, they will treat you very differently when they know you know their name and their title, and you've documented the day and the time and the office and so on. All of a sudden, they're much more careful about the information you give you. And if they tell you something, this is according to this statute or law, tell them, would you please send me that statute? I'd like to have a copy of that statute. Here's my email address. Could you send that to me? And get them to write it down real carefully, repeat it, make sure they know that you are taking those notes. Government bureaucracies, once they know you are doing that, things happen very differently. And so it's very valuable. But for your mission tomorrow, practice, call in, sign up, volunteer, and don't take no for an answer.
We've got time for maybe a couple more questions.
Hi, my name's Grant. I'm on the second floor to your left. And Matthew, this question's for you. You mentioned video evidence and the rise of cell phones and how pretty much everyone has a video or a device capable of taking video right in your pocket. And whether or not we can trust that video What are your thoughts on that? And also deepfake, using AI and images to relay a new face onto someone else's. So say, for example, President Trump's face deepfaked onto someone else, and they're so advanced that even the lips will match the words.
It's a risk, but I don't think a major risk. Most video, the video that we're going to use is in very normal sort of course of business life. Of course, this is a risk, but I don't think it's a really prevalent one. The one thing I will add, though, to the risk of recording is that in 39 and now 40 states, really, the consent law is such that we can. There are 10 states, so I'd be aware, go to the internet and look, where you cannot film somebody without their consent. Those are two-way consent states, usually the most corrupt states, Illinois, Maryland, for instance. Massachusetts was one. We actually, Project Veritas, filed a brief and brought a suit to the state Supreme Court, and we've actually flipped the consent law. So it was 39. It's now 40 states out of 50 that you can use video and film somebody without their knowing, and then you can use that video publicly because you as the one party can give consent. But I'm not that worried about the depth of AI deep faking because there's very few people in the world who have that capacity.
Well, there's simple images or even web programs that you can run on Windows 10, and they use AI, like, for example, Waifu X. Like, you can sort of deep fake, and if you have a powerful enough CPU, it can actually be done pretty easily and in a matter of a day.
Well, let's do this. Let's take another question.
Hi, my name is Dave Ziffer. I'm from Hopkins. Our first speaker, whose name I don't remember, unfortunately, really hit home with her first words. And she said, they attack, we respond, they attack, we respond. How did we get to this point where the Republican Party is never on the offense? Like, you cannot win a football game if you are never playing offense. How has this happened over the course of decades to the detriment of the party? And how has the party allowed them? And then a related question, you're talking about Soros and the courts. Where are our billionaires financing? You know, you're talking to a bunch of people here who are not billionaires. I'm not one. Where are the people fighting on the other side of the legal battle to get rational constraints put in place on elections so that we're not sitting here talking about this kind of insanity?
You know, the basic, I started out in this whole election world when I was a officer of the Republican Party in at that time was actually 2 counties. I read the manual and it said, we're responsible to provide election judges, Republican ones, to the system. Okay? I'm a literalist. That's what it says. That's what I do. So I actually recruited and did that and took it serious. But I didn't wait for the Minnesota State Republican Party to tell me. I acted. I acted on the basis that I'm a patriot, I'm a citizen, I will do what I can do if I even can't do everything. I also, though, did it in a way that was respectful. So I contacted the county auditor and let her know I'm the chair of the party here. It's my job to provide you with Republican election judges. Here's my email address, here's my home phone number. We didn't have cell phones then. And you can call me at any time that you are short, and I will see to it that you will have what you need to fulfill our responsibility to make sure you have it. This government, this great country of America, was not founded on a centralized bureaucratic government. We are founded on freedom, individual responsibilities to take action. And so, first of all, don't wait for any party. Do your job, do your part. Always start from the circle of responsibility. Be the mayor of you. Do what you can do and search for that first of all, and then start reaching out and working together with your friends and neighbors. That is pure America. There are not many countries you get to do that. And if we don't fight for it, we may lose it yet. But it really starts with us in that individual area. Why don't they? You know, I've worked with them for a long time. I've done a variety of things, but I get really tired of doing it. So turn to the army of all of you and take action where you can. Form a city committee, form a county group, take action, be careful, be respectful always, because you'll get more and you'll get farther when you do that.
Well, we could talk about these issues for a lot longer time. We're actually a little over time, so this is probably a good time to end. So let's have a round of applause for our panel, and we will be adjourned.